Miranda, thanks for joining us. You went to the US expecting crazy politics. It's probably even more crazy than you expected. What troubles me about what's unfolding in the US is the ongoing failure of the left really to accept the 2016 election result. As we heard from Robert De Niro the other day, they just want to stop Trump any way they can, and they're forgetting about actually the democratic outcome and trying just to defeat him in an election.
Yes, it's what Steve Bannon described it as nullifying the election result. They've never accepted that Donald Trump is legitimate. In fact, we've had Hillary Clinton running around the country now promoting a new book that she's written with Chelsea, and she's one of the main protagonists, calling Trump the illegitimate president, the occupant of the Oval Office. They just have refused from day one to accept that he won the election fair and square, and they've tried to pretend that the Russians got him into office and also all sorts of other nefarious things. But the fact was Hillary Clinton was just a terrible candidate, and Donald Trump resonated with the people in Middle America.
There's no chance, surely, that Hillary Clinton's going to throw her hat into the ring again?
Well, look, honestly, the way she's carrying on, she's popped up everywhere. Last week, she had every single day, she had a pretty high-profile event at which she was really trailing her coat for being picked again and, you know, sort of re-prosecuting the 2016 election, acting as if the impeachment process that's been launched by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats is some sort of vindication for her. She's never accepted her mistakes, and she just now has written this book called The Book of Gutsy Women. She has a list of 100 women that she's claiming are inspirational, gutsy women, and the subtext of it all is that she's the gutsiest of them all.
The level of self-delusion here is extraordinary. Now, let's talk about the impeachment process. Of course, the Ukrainian inquiry is going to go ahead now. They've got their impeachment issue, even though it really has appeared out of the clear blue air. For the past 2 years, it's all been about Russian collusion and trying to get impeachment that way. Of course, the Mueller inquiry found that that was completely false. There was no collusion between the Trump camp and Russia. But now, of course, the Attorney General's investigation into the origins of all of that conspiracy has roped in Australia. Now, what intrigues me about the incredible amount of hyperventilation about this yesterday, especially in the Australian media, was we've always known all about this. We've known for over a year about how Alexander Downer's conversation might have been one of the very first tip-offs about some Russian investigation. And we knew back in May when Donald Trump said publicly that he wanted the Attorney General to investigate all aspects of this, including Australia, that of course that Australian angle was going to be investigated. And of course there's no way known Australia would refuse to cooperate with such a request.
Exactly. It's no secret. It's been known that, you know, Alexander Downer's meeting with George Papadopoulos, a sort of low-level Trump apparatchik for the campaign in that London wine room back in May 2016, was the catalyst that sparked the whole FBI probe into Donald Trump's alleged and, as it turns out, non-existent collusion with Russia. And the Mueller report, which was tabled last week after, I think, 50 million Australian dollars and 2 years of investigations, and came up with a donut, that actually says that the catalyst for the whole FBI probe was Alexander Downer. And, you know, it's very curious now. Alexander Downer has never really explained fully his role and why he met with George Papadopoulos, why he instigated that meeting. And also, I mean, we learned today from The Guardian, if that's correct, that in fact Alexander Downer was freelancing, that he hadn't told Malcolm Turnbull that he was going to then transmit the information he got from George Papadopoulos that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton to Americans. So he was freelancing, according to Papadopoulos and The Guardian and various other sources. Why was he doing that? And I think for Australia, not just for Trump, we need to know why. And Joe Hockey, in his letter to the Trump administration back in May, offering to help the Attorney General Barr's investigation into the origins of this Russian collusion hoax, said, well, obviously Alexander Downer doesn't work for the government anymore, but we'll do our best. So I guess Alexander Downer's a private citizen. He can do what he likes. But one way or the other, there is going to be information forthcoming on what he knew and why he knew it.
Yeah, well, I think he's...
why he decided to go direct to the Americans.
I read your column about this, and I must admit, you see the hint of a scandal here that I don't see. I suppose I've discussed, as I said on my show yesterday, discussed this with Alexander Downer directly and have the odd chat on air. I find it entirely unsurprising. The interesting thing here is Papadoulis. He's a pretty discredited figure these days anyway, but he's talking up some sort of grand conspiracy that Alexander Downer was somehow trying to do in Donald Trump. The fact is, he heard this snippet from Papadopoulos and passed it back to Canberra and the Americans, as you would expect. The idea that he would hear about Russia having dirt on the Hillary Clinton and not pass it back through diplomatic channels, again, would be absurd, wouldn't it?
Well, no, it's unusual that he would pass it directly to Americans, as The Guardian says today, presumably having been told this by Malcolm Turnbull, who seems to have backgrounded Catherine Murphy in her story, saying that he was blindsided by Alexander Downer's actions on this. He had no idea that this was going on. And the other...
Well, there wasn't much going on. He had a conversation with a bloke in a bar and a cable went back to Australia. Now, the Americans would have seen that cable and the Americans will speak to Alexander Downer. I fail to see where else this could lead, unless Australia knows something else about this Russian connection, the initial Russian investigation or dirt file, as it was called. It doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that Papadopoulos was the one who had that information.
Well, look, you might be right, it might be completely innocent, but it wasn't just a chance meeting in a bar. It was a meeting that was engineered by Alexander Downer.
Oh, no, it wasn't. It was engineered by the embassy, and he went along and had a drink and passed it on. This is the whole
well,
sort
look,
of...
He was the High Commissioner.
Yes.
Look, I know, Chris, that you worked for Alexander Downer and you're close with him, and I'm not impugning your motives or his. I'm just saying that I think that it would be good. We haven't been told the entire story, and I think we need to, for Australia's sake, as much as for Donald Trump's investigation. And there are 3 investigations that Attorney General Barr here is conducting, which vaguely around these attacks on Donald Trump, one of them involving the genesis of the Russian collusion hoax. And that has at its very centre Alexander Downer. And so, I think that Scott Morrison...
I just don't think... Of course they're going to investigate that. And of course Australia's going to cooperate, but the idea that he's at the centre of this is silly. There's some deep state Australia involved in trying to do in Trump before he's even the officially endorsed candidate.
Look, I'm sorry, Chris, but the Mueller report says that the catalyst was Alexander Downer's, tipping off the FBI that American authorities in London, that George Papadopoulos claimed that the Russians had hacked into the DNC emails and that this was going to be dirt that was going to damage Hillary Clinton. Now, it turns out the whole Russian collusion story was a hoax, but there were people wanting to frame Donald Trump. This is what Donald Trump thinks. Maybe it's wrong, but we will find out very soon. These 3 investigations that are going on, that the Attorney General, Department of Justice is conducting, one of them, Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, his investigation will be tabled in this month. And the other 2 are forthcoming. So I think that there will be a lot of information, and it's partly why you see Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani, his personal lawyer, almost jumping out of their skins with fury because, they seem to think that there was a real deep state conspiracy to get Donald Trump, and that involved not only Australia, but the Ukraine and also Italy. There's another whole strand which we won't bother going into.
Crazy
now,
times.
They may be paranoid, delusional, crazy crackpots, and they may not be. You know, who knows? But I have an open mind, and I think that there are questions about Alexander Downer which need to be answered, and he's not really been forthcoming. He says, oh, you know, I don't know, I just met this guy in a bar and just passed the information on. It's a bit more than that, I think.
Yeah, well, I think there's conspiracy theories toted widely from the right and left over all of this, and we'll know more again when we hear from the Attorney General's report. Thanks so much for joining us, Miranda.
Thanks, Chris.